Could you share with us your experience of designing, like maybe one of the project that you are really proud of, or the project that you feel like, oh, this is one of the project that made me successful?
Okay. Well, I think our CSI, or our creativity program, was one that was very successful because we looked around and saw that there were many programs on creative thinking and hundreds of books and hundreds of YouTube videos. And if you added up all the steps, there were thousands of steps you could take to be creative. If you were very diligent, you could go online or go into a library and forever and ever and ever read about how to be creative. So there was no point in us writing another book or designing another program. There's already very good programs out there on how to be creative. So we first looked at what was out there and how good it was and how much volume there was. So there could be a lot of bad stuff with a lot of volume, or a lot of good stuff with little volume, but either way, there was already a very crowded marketplace. So that's the content. And then we thought, well, what content is missing? But equally important is the method. So we also looked at much of the content was just around an expert talking, or an expert writing, or an expert sharing many, many PowerPoint slides. And so we felt that perhaps that wasn't, as educators, that wasn't the most effective way for them to learn, or for someone to learn. There's a very big difference between just giving content and people learning it. I think that's a mistake a lot of companies make. Or you often go to hear the author of a great book share his insights, and he or she are, I've found, sometimes terrible communicators verbally. They're great communicators writing, but it doesn't necessarily mean they can take that content and move it into a more verbal or physical space, or in our case, digital. So the two really key things were to find what content is needed in the space that you're working in, but equally important is what method are you going to use. And don't think it's just about presenting the content through a PowerPoint or a talk or a book. And I think the real value now is to be able to present that content through many, many channels, and not channels independently, but channels that all blend in together. So you're creating a whole experience. You're not just creating a single platform of a talk and then a workbook and then a LMS, but the whole thing is completely blended together. So the participants are not bored, and they're moving fast, and they're engaged, and you're engaging all their senses. They're learning their auditory, their visual, their kinesthetic, all their senses are being engaged, not just one single sense. So if you go to hear someone speak, they're only really engaging your ears. If you read a book, they're only engaging your eyes. And that only caters to a certain type of learner. So when you're designing a program, it has to engage their audio-visual kinesthetic. It also, if you're familiar with DISC, it has to engage the dominant people, the influencing people, the supportive people, the conscientious people. So once you've come up with the content, you've got to keep what I call like raking a rake over sand. Go through it over and over again to say, are these people going to be engaged at what time? So a conscientious person needs facts. Now, if you gave a whole workshop on facts, you would bore everyone else. But you would need to go through the workshop enough and say, how many times will a conscientious person really like this session? But an influencing person likes interaction and discussion and talking and humour. So then you've got to go through the same. Once you've designed it, you've then got to go through it again and say, where will the influencing person really like what I'm doing? And a dominant person just wants to get straight to the point. So you can't fluff around too long or they'll get bored. So then you go back through the content again and say, where will a dominant person be engaged? And this is the secrets of what I think makes a really good session, by going through these different components over and over again to make sure that we're catering for everyone. Now, if you're lucky, you might have the right personality that perfectly fits the right person in the group, which is why one-on-one is more effective, because you can generally read their body language. But if you're presenting to a group, you've got to really cater for the person that's not you as a presenter, the person that least wants to be there in the room. So content and method is what I would say needs to be equally balanced.
I've heard that you designed the On Thin Ice project at SEAC, right? Could you share with us the experience of designing it? How was it? What do
Sure.
you?
Well, we started with the outcome. We were working in Asia, and we realized there were many teams that were often we were called up by clients who often had an expat boss, maybe from Germany, and he was told to come and work in Thailand. And clearly the personality and culture of someone who's maybe used to working in a German culture did not work too well in a Thai culture. There were just too many differences. And then there was the comment of companies would say, well, if we're a German company, we've got to behave German. And the locals would say, well, if we're Thai or Singapore or Vietnamese, you're in my country. And so there was this tension between that. And we thought, it's no good just, again, giving someone a book. There's a great book called Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands about how to work between cultures. There's no good doing that. Let's take them through an experience so they can see for themselves the dynamics of the issue. Now, it started with, as I said, that expat local culture, but then it turned soon into how do you work with virtual teams? How do you work with high-performing teams? Again, how does a D in DISC talk to an I or a C? So it started with the expat local, but then it quickly moved. But the important thing is we knew there was a problem, and it wasn't just about presenting them with information, because again, they can go and read that from a book. Often they don't see the problem. Neither team could see the problem. They just knew there was tension. And of course, they all blame each other. The expat blamed the locals, and the locals blamed the expat. So we had to create an experience for them to see these issues happening in real time, right in front of their face. And fun, because if it wasn't fun, it would get too stressful. So it had to have a bit of humor, they had to enjoy it. But at the same time, while they were enjoying it and while they were being distracted by doing an activity or a task, they were able to see these things happen in real life. Now, sometimes these things, when they happen in real life, they happen too slowly. So that tension just happens so slowly, you don't really get to see it. And sometimes it happens so fast that it happens and it's gone and you can't talk about it again. By us controlling that tension in a game or an activity, then we are able to manipulate that activity in a way that people can see it actually happening, and then they can't deny it, and then we can do something about it. So for example, when we play the On Thin Ice game and we're around the tents or the digital version, and they're all trying to navigate through a map, and somebody is dominating the process and they're controlling the whole process, and they're saying, does everyone have it on their map? And two people answer yes and one person doesn't answer. Well, the person that doesn't answer probably doesn't have it on their map, but if they're shy or it's a passive culture, they're not going to call out in front of their boss, I don't have it. And then the whole thing goes bad. If we can watch that happening in real life and realize that the leader was not including everyone, or the leader was dominating the conversation, then we're able to say back to them at the end of the game, how did that game go? Did you succeed? Where did you succeed? Where did you fail? Did you realize that one of you was dominating the conversation? Did you realize that John over there was very quiet? He wasn't feeling very comfortable during the conversation. Let's go back and now unpack that last 45 minutes. Once they've unpacked that last 45 minutes and they've agreed that that is the issue, then comes the pivot to say, okay, does this happen in real life back in the workplace? And it's amazing that everyone nods and says, yes, it does happen in real life back in the workplace. And now we can't deny it. The boss can't deny it. The team can't deny it. Okay, we've seen it happen in real life right now in the last 45 minutes playing the On Thin Ice game. I'm particularly talking about the last task. Now, where are these dynamics happening in real life? And someone might say, well, the leader dominates the group. John's always quiet. He has some answers, but he's not asked to volunteer them. So now that we're seeing this happen in real life, what are we going to do about it? What action plan are we going to create? And it might be, well, as a leader, I will make sure that I will go around each person in the group and I will ask each person individually, are you okay with this point? Or share back with me how you understand that point works. And by doing that, we've had that learning experience that may have only lasted an hour, but now it's with us for the rest of our life. It also means as a leader, if that same dynamic is happening a week later or a month later, he now has the platform or the ability to talk about it and say, hey, remember when we played the On Thin Ice game? Remember when we played the Getting to the Core or the virtual navigation game? Do you remember when, John, you were really quiet and that affected everyone not being able to get their map on time? I think that's happening now in the workplace. John, what can I do to get you to be more assertive? And so it gives everyone the opportunity to talk again later on down the road. And this is far more than a training program or delivering content. Where it's true facilitation. Now, the million-dollar question is, can we transfer that facilitation to online, digitally? And obviously that is a lot more difficult because you can't see everyone's body language and you can't see the dynamics of the people in the room. So the first thing is we need to go much smaller if we're really going to digitalize it. I'm calling it facilitated online experiences. So again, we're not just talking heads presenting a webinar to someone, but we're creating the same experience online. As I said, it is more difficult, but we want to be able to create that experience and then debrief it and talk about it.
What about difficulties or obstacles of when you were designing an experience? What kind of problems that you usually or normally encounter with?
Well, you don't know how it's going to work until you try it. And this is the challenge. You have to, On Thin Ice and creativity, creative scene investigation, On Thin Ice is 20 years old and we're still changing it and we're still adjusting it. Creativity is about 8 years old now and we're still changing and adjusting it. Really getting the instructions clear, getting the flow clear, working out the amount of time that is needed for each activity. What do you do? Again, this is a live dialogue. It's a live conversation. It's not you presenting to a dead audience. It's not passive, which means you can't control how the audience is going to behave. And so you really, as a new designer, need to go back over and over and over thinking, what could go wrong? Where could it go wrong? What would happen if I had a quiet group? What would happen if I had a noisy group? What would happen if one person dominated the group? How do I get engagement if people are getting bored? Where are the dead times in the training session? Where are the times where people might pull out their phone and start to check the SMS because they're not 100% engaged? Or in a live workshop, if you've got a very large audience and you start to hear people coughing, it's a natural trigger that people are getting bored. So you need to preempt that or try it many, many times with a group of very patient people. And each time you do it, you come back and improve it. So On Thin Ice is very different to what it was. The principle's the same, the concept's the same, the 6 tasks are still the same, the CSI game board is still the same, but we're constantly tweaking and improving it and changing the language to make sure the instructions are clear.
I'm interested in understanding more about at that period of time when you design On Thin Ice, what some assumptions that you made, what were elements that you seeked out in order to design that course?
Well, as I said, we didn't start with an Antarctic theme. We started with the outcome, and that was that people were not working together well. And then we thought, how do we make it memorable? So it was not just about creating an experience, a flat experience, but saying, is there some theme? And it's very important here that the theme is not a gimmick, but the theme is genuinely connected to the topic. So I've seen a lot of people out there just connecting what I call a gimmicky theme. It really has no relationship. So On Thin Ice is not just going to Antarctica because we want to do something different. That is where the most research has taken place outside of corporate on virtual teams and on high-performing teams. And we've even, as you know, we've interviewed Antarctica explorers. We can come bring them on the session if they want to give some level of authentication to it. With the creativity one, again, we discovered that there were a few things that were blocking people's creativity and not allowing them to be creative. And we thought, well, what rather than just stand up and say, here are the 7 things according to neuroscience that block your creativity, we thought, well, blocking, killing, that maybe it's a bit like that Cluedo game, who killed with what weapon and where. And so again, we then connected a theme to it. But that theme, as I said, is not just a gimmick. It is actually running right through the whole program, the concept of a crime scene. And as you read the book, Who Killed Creativity, you'll see we've got a crime scene and research from criminologists and research about detectives. And that way it becomes memorable. People will remember On Thin Ice and creative scene investigation 10, 15 years after they've done the program. And I love it when people come up to me 10 or 15 years after and say, hey, I still remember that. Now, I challenge them to remember any other workshop or keynote talk they've gone to with that level of recalling, because once you remember, oh, we went to Antarctica or we became detectives for a day, they remember that. And it's something that then they start to think about the experience and the feeling they had, or the chocolate factory. They remember eating all the chocolates, and then from eating all the chocolates, and that almost it's a physical thing. If I talk about chocolate, your mouth is starting to want to have chocolate. Then they start to remember, oh, it was chaotic, it didn't work, the customer didn't work well, there was no communication in the chocolate factory, there was no leadership. Oh, but then we made the chocolate factory better. What did we do better to make the chocolate factory? So each of these programs that I've talked about, On Thin Ice, going to Antarctica, CSI, the detectives, and the chocolate factory, about process improvement, are all connected to a genuine theme, not a gimmicky theme.
That was a very good one. So your feeling was, if the theme is memorable enough, people will remember and will look back and go back to that lesson that they've learned, and they will retain more information. And
that, I hate to say it, but not everyone can do that. That takes creativity, because I had to connect virtual teams to Antarctica. I had to connect creativity to a crime scene, and I had to connect process redesign to chocolates. So that, I suppose that's where the creativity comes in. I mean, that's it. It may look easy now because it's all so beautifully integrated, but not all of our programs fall into place that quickly. But I happened to be reading a very trashy novel on Antarctica 20 years ago, and as I was reading the novel, it was just a novel. It was a dumb, like I said, a really trashy one. But I was watching the team in Antarctica as I was reading the novel and thinking, oh, this could be an interesting theme for our program on virtual teams or cross-cultural teams or high-performing teams. But that's where the creativity comes in. But again, I warn you, too many people have done this as a gimmick. It's not genuine. It's not a genuine theme. It's just connecting it up to make people feel good. And that requires the creativity, which is the creative thinking, and then the critical thinking, which is all the research to try and connect it together. And then I hate to tell you, you won't sleep at night. Your brain won't turn off. Everything you read and everything you watch and every YouTube video, oh, that'll be good for there and that'll be good for there. And so you start collecting a database. And that doesn't happen overnight. That takes years and years. But you may as well start now.
We need to design a concept. And yeah, I really like the themes, memorable themes that are not gimmicky. I think we need to do more research on that. Like a lot of
the $1 million question is, which comes first, the theme or the content? And I don't know the answer to that. Logical order that I start with the content and then find a theme, or I start with a theme and then find a content. Each one has been different depending on what creative thought I get and where I get it. It often is, as we know, with creative thinking, it's not going to happen necessarily in the office staring at a computer screen. It might happen out for a walk, driving the car, having a shower, or on holidays.
Really great opportunity for us to get to talk with people that been in the field for a long time and have some experience. So
I would suggest have a look on our website under those programs. I mean, the creativity ones, whokilledcreativity.com, and On Thin Ice can be found under Tirian.com. But there's a lot of resources and videos just so you get a feel of how those themes connect. And now we've designed the whole online learning management system, which is courses.tirian.com. And that'll show you how we've connected the whole blended learning experience, still maintaining the theme, but blending it right through the whole process.